Hi everyone, I'm Catherine from the Ridgefield Historical Society. I'm delighted to welcome back Terry McManus, archivist and historian of the Ridgefield Garden Club. Terry will give part two of a two-part presentation about Anne Richardson and Anne's Ridgefield estate and gardens. Terry, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Catherine. It's so good to see you again.
We can't wait to hear part two. So I'm going to let you take it away. Enjoy,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to get to my presentation first. I'll take a moment. All right, I am so happy to be here today to talk about Anne Richardson's estate, which she called Mamanasco Farm. This is part two of a two-part presentation about Anne and about her estate and time here in Ridgefield. Anne was a 50-year member of the Ridgefield Garden Club, and many of the things that you're going to be seeing in today's presentation are taken directly from Ridgefield Garden Club archives. We have a very rich archive dating to 1914 when our club was founded, and we are so happy to be able to store our archives at the Ridgefield Historical Society's Scott House in their state-of-the-art archives facility. What I would like to do over the next 10 or 15 minutes is more or less take you on a virtual tour of Richardson Park, which is part of what Anne's estate was back in the day, and show you some remnants of her estate that are still there, as well as give you a glimpse into what the estate looked like when she lived there. This is a colorized photograph of Lake Maminasco from the 1920s. And you can see in the middle of the photograph the white cliffs. And if you look up above to the right, there's a very kind of fuzzy image, but that is Anne Richardson's estate. Her estate consisted of 110 acres on the north end of Maminasco Lake. And at the time that she lived there, and as you can kind of see in this photograph, she had 360-degree views. Absolutely beautiful estate. She built the estate in 1915 when she moved to Ridgefield with her longtime partner and companion, Edna Scheuer. And here's a picture of the cliffs today taken from across Maminasco Lake. So her house would have been up on top of the cliffs in the back behind the trees, which didn't exist at the time that she was here. When Anne died in 1965, the estate totaled 110 acres. The piece that I'm going to be talking about today is the piece that is now Richardson Park, 29.5 acres. She donated that piece of property to the town when she died in 1965. She stipulated that the house that she and Edna shared for so many years be torn down and that the town use it as a town park. So that's going to be my focus today, but I do want to also briefly touch on the rest of her estate. She also owned 77 acres of property across North Salem Road, shown there at the top, and her estate sold that property to the town at a very, very low cost. And that today is now where Ridgefield High School is, Scotts Ridge Middle School, Tiger Hollow, and so on. Anne also owned, and if you look down more toward the lower part of this slide, she owned an acre of property across North Salem Road with 2 houses on it. Those 2 houses are still there, private property, and that's where her gardeners lived. And then at the very bottom, you see 2 acres, and that is now private property, but that is where her working farm existed. So that's her entire estate was 110 acres. What we're going to be focusing on are those 30 acres, which is where her house was located, as well as most of her gardens. Richardson Park, I think, is very few people know about Richardson Park, and it's a gem of a park. I hope everyone will be able to get there. It is across from the high school, across North Salem Road, and it's marked with this sign. At the entrance is a very large Norway maple tree that would have been there at the time that Anne Richardson lived there. One of the wonderful things about Richardson Park is that there are many trees there, many trees still in place that would have been there when Anne was there. And the town has planted many trees since then. The park is often called Ridgefield's Arboretum. So as you drive into the park, the first thing you're going to see is this stone house straight in front of you. And this is a private residence today. It's owned by the town. For many years, Paul Roche, the Parks and Recreation Director, lived there until he retired. And now the town rents the house to a Ridgefield police officer at a very low cost rent. And in exchange, the police officer does provide security for the park as well as some other services. So today that home is a private residence. Back in Anne Richardson's day, it was her garage and her chauffeur's apartment. So here we see an undated photograph of Anne's cars parked out in front of the garage. When you drive into the park, at the edge of the parking lot is this kiosk, and inside the kiosk is a poster that was a joint project between Ridgefield Garden Club, Cotatoa Garden Club, and the town of Ridgefield Parks and Recreation Department. The poster provides information about Anne Richardson, about her life, as well as things to look for in the park. So if you do go to the park, we hope you'll take a quick look at this as a reminder of what to be looking at when you're there. Just beyond the kiosk is this swing set. And the swing set is roughly located, more or less, where Anne and Edna's house was located. Here is their house. Back in the day, it was a large white colonial. And if you look out kind of on the left side of the photograph, there's a porch. And if you look out through that porch, you get a sense of how high up this house was. And it really had sweeping views. The front of the house is what looked down toward Lake Maminasco and definitely looked down over Lake Maminasco. Here's their home in 1940 as it's decorated for the holidays. We're very fortunate to have in Ridgefield Garden Club archives a number of films prepared by Edna Scheuer, and one film in particular from 1939 that shows flowers at Mamanasco Farm. So I'd like to play, it's about a 1.5-minute clip of that today. And I'm going to have you just focus on a couple of things. I'll mention a few things that I'm going to be coming back to when we continue our virtual tour of today's park, because you'll see some of these same things again. I'm going to just start the film here. All right. So the first thing that I want you to notice is a large rock on the left. We're going to come back to that. And notice there's a goldfish pond in front of another large rock, which is right across from the one that we just saw. There's Anne and Edna's house up in the distance, and you can see all the beautiful daffodils that they had planted on the hill leading up to the house. Again, Maminasco Lake would be off on the left at this point. Now here's a view up toward the house from the other side. All of their gardens would have been off to the right. Again, Anne loved trees, and there were trees everywhere on the property. They also had a number of formal gardens, and we're going to be seeing several of them today. Please notice in the background there, the large rock outcropping with all of the gardens around it. This is actually a group of Anne's friends from St. Stephen's gathering in front of the rock. And I talk a little bit more about that in part one, her affiliation with St. Stephen's. Notice this woman looking at the goldfish pond. We're going to come back to that. And then here we see very formal rose gardens that Anne and Edna had that were designed by Professor Hugh Finley, who was a world-renowned rose expert, and he was a professor at Columbia University. He designed these gardens for them. And we will see later that there are still remnants of the walls of these gardens at Richardson Park. All right, so now we're coming back to present day. And you'll recall at the beginning of the film, I asked you to just make mental note of the two large rock structures. And this is what we see here today. So after you pass by the swing set, you'll come to these two large rocks. And remember, back in her day, there were gardens planted around them. The remnants of that goldfish pond that we saw the young woman in the blue dress looking down into are still there in place today. This is an image from another film in our archives that Edna Scheuer prepared that I'm not able to show today, but I do want to show you the still from it because it shows another pond on their property that is a much larger pond. And when you're at Richardson Park, if you walk down the hill toward the lake, kind of off to the left, you can still see remnants of this larger pond. I know this is not a beautiful picture, and there are obviously some invasive plants and everything there, but this at their time was one of their beautiful gardens. In fact, we know that when they had a national tour of their gardens in 1927, that this was one of the featured parts of their gardens. I was just at Richardson Park over the weekend, and I want to point out, if you look behind the pond, you see kind of some bright green. Those are Virginia bluebells, and they are out in forest right now. They're down around this pond. And then also as you go back up toward the house, remember this is a view from the film of the house with all the daffodils planted. You'll often see daffodils planted there, but today you'll also see Virginia bluebells. This has been a civic project for many different organizations in town, including the Ridgefield Garden Club, where daffodils are planted all over Richardson Park because we all know how much Anne and Edna loved daffodils. In fact, as recently as 2017, here's a group of high school seniors and one of the National Charity League organizations in town who did a daffodil planting at Richardson Park then. So here are some of the remnants of Anne and Edna's gardens. Here is the rose garden that we saw quite an extensive clip from. And as you walk down the steps of the rose garden, right in front of you will be this structure. And this was Anne's gardener's tool shed. To the left of it would have been a large asparagus patch during Anne's time, and there also would have been a small vineyard. Then if you sort of turn around and continue walking through the park, so now the tool shed is behind us, the asparagus patch and the vineyard would have been off on the right. And just to give you some bearings here, Ridgefield High School, you can sort of see way off in the distance, the white building on the left. Now there's this huge field. During Anne Richardson's time, this would have been a large flower cutting garden on the left and a large vegetable garden on the right. You can see the mowed area through the middle of the field, and that during Anne's time was also a path. At that time it was stone lined, and you can still see the stones along there leading to that line of trees off in the distance. I just want to point out that it is a huge cutting garden for flowers. Anne and Edna were both flower arrangers, but by far Edna was the more serious flower arranger, and she won awards for her flower arrangements internationally. All right, so if we keep walking through this field at Richardson Park, once we get to that set of trees and we look off to our left, here we see what would have been Anne and Edna's fruit orchard. They had a lot of fruit trees that were part of their farm. And since that time, you know, the town has continued to plant trees everywhere in Richardson Park, but certainly in this area here. And again, you can see the white Ridgefield High School kind of off in the distance on the right. And then if you were to look to your right, this would have been a hayfield during Anne and Edna's time. Way off on the very far right, barely in view, is a brown house. During Anne and Edna's time, that was the farmhouse. And that is the 2-acre working farm that supported Mamanasco Farm. Today it's private property, so I can't take you on a virtual tour of it, but I did have the opportunity to do that through the Ridgefield Historical Society a couple of years ago with the owner. And all of the farm buildings that were in place during Ann's time, like the Jamesway barn, like a couple of chicken coops, like a corn crib, like a bullpen, stables and so on, even cold frames and so on, are still there today. The family that owns the farm purchased it from Ann's estate in 1968, and they've continued to preserve it much as it was during Ann's time. While we're not able to go there because it's private, I do have one photograph from back in Ann's time. And this is a 1940 photograph that shows her longtime superintendent, Leon Sauvé, who was a superintendent there for 25 years. You can see him standing in front of one of the chicken coops. It's an unusual chicken coop. It's an octagonal design. He actually designed the coop and he patented that design. I mentioned before that Richardson Park is often called Ridgefield's Arboretum. I had the opportunity a few years ago to walk the park with then town warden John Pinchbeck, and he pointed out to me trees that he believed were in place at the time that Ann was there. And that includes the Japanese maple that we saw at the entrance to the park. It includes a fernleaf beech, an apple tree, a cherry tree, at least one oak tree, at least one sugar maple. It also includes a butternut tree that he believes Ann probably brought back from a trip to Turkey. When she and Edna traveled, and they were worldwide travelers, they would often bring back tree specimens and garden specimens from those adventures. And there's also a hornbeam that would have been there when Ann was there. In addition, in 2010, the town received a grant from the Ann S. Richardson Fund to plant 25 trees. So that happened in 2010. And that's also when they did a lot of the clearing of the park. And we see now today much better where the hayfield was, where the orchard was, where her flower garden was, and where the vegetable garden was. So that is a very quick view of Richardson Park today, as well as what it looked like back in Ann's time. And I hope this maybe has inspired you to also watch part 1 of this presentation to learn more about the amazing Ann Richardson and everything that she did for Ridgefield during her 50 years here in town. Thank you.